I had always thought of my life as ordinary, mundane even. Work during the day, quiet evenings with a book or some late-night shows, the occasional dinner with friends. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would ever make a story worth telling. That was until the day I stumbled across Labobu. I was wandering through a tiny, dusty thrift store at the edge of town, looking for nothing in particular, when a small, odd doll caught my eye. It sat alone on a cracked wooden shelf, its painted eyes too sharp, too focused. I picked it up, running my fingers over its worn fabric. There was something oddly deliberate about its features, but I laughed it off, just a weird, handcrafted toy. I tucked it under my arm, telling myself it would be a cute decoration for my apartment. That night I set it on the shelf beside my bed. And that's when I noticed it, just for a second, a tilt of its head that I swore hadn't been there before. I shook my head. I didn't know then that it was watching me. I went to sleep thinking it was nothing. But that night something changed. A faint sound, a whisper, or maybe just the wind rippled through the room, and when I blinked, the doll's head was slightly turned. I told myself it was impossible. And yet, unease had already settled in, quiet but insistent. At first, it was small things barely noticeable. A shadow that seemed to stretch just a little too long across my living room floor. A sudden chill in the air that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I would glance at Labobu, perched innocently on the shelf, and convince myself it was my imagination. I even laughed at the thought that a doll could somehow be alive. But laughter faded quickly when I noticed subtle changes. The way its painted eyes caught, the light differently, or the faint tilt of its head, always just slightly off from where I remembered leaving it. I swear I didn't move it, I whispered one evening, noticing it had shifted closer to the edge of the shelf. My roommate, Sam, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're sleep-deprived," he said, shaking his head. "It's a doll, not a ghost." But then came the knock, soft at first, tapping on the walls at night, always near where the doll sat. And the whispers, just on the edge of hearing, never forming words, but always there when I was alone. I tried researching the doll online, thinking maybe it was some rare collectible, maybe a harmless old toy with a story. Almost every page had vanished, wiped clean as if someone didn't want me to know. Only fragments remained, warnings, cryptic forum posts, people claiming they had felt watched, or worse. I stopped sleeping well. Ordinary things, my morning coffee, casual chats with friends, the mundane hum of the city suddenly clashed violently with the creeping unease that followed me everywhere. Even on a bright afternoon, when sunlight poured through my windows, a dark weight seemed to linger in the corners of my apartment. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a doll. Something had changed, and I was only just beginning to realize how deep this went. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doll's movements, the whispers, the cold that seemed to seep into my bones, I needed answers. I spent hours online, digging through obscure forums and old archive posts, searching for anything connected to Labubu. What I found made my stomach twist. Scattered across the internet were mentions of Labubu. Incidents, stories eerily, similar to mine. Dolls appearing in the middle of rooms. Owners reporting whispers, shadows that moved independently. Some threads had been deleted entirely, leaving only ghostly fragments. "Don't bring it home. It watches and waits. You can't get rid of it." One user, in a nearly illegible post, wrote, "Everyone who owned it disappeared, except the one who left a note for me." My hands shook as I scrolled. A photograph attached to the post showed a doll with the same sharp eyes, the same stitched mouth, perched on a shelf that looked eerily like mine. I tried to follow the trail, but most of the forum threads were gone, wiped clean as if someone or something didn't want me to know. Only occasional cached pages remained, showing cryptic warnings and half-erased comments from other owners who had vanished without a trace. I became obsessed. I cataloged every move Labubu made, every whisper that brushed past my consciousness. The doll seemed to respond to my attention, tilting its head, shifting subtly whenever I looked away. It was as though acknowledging its presence made it bolder, more deliberate. I started marking the times, recording every detail in a journal. That slowly filled my apartment with the anxiety I couldn't shake. Sleep became a fragile, fractured thing, punctuated by glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision. Meta posts online hinted at something more sinister, a network of people who had encountered the doll and survived only long enough to leave warnings. They spoke of patterns, rituals, and rules, vague yet horrifyingly consistent. Some included notes in the margins. Do not stare too long. Do not speak its name at night. Don't make it angry. My mind couldn't ignore the parallels with my own experiences. Then came the note. It appeared one morning on my doorstep, unsigned, hastily written. It knows you found the others. Do not ignore it. My pulse raced, the words echoing through my thoughts as I stared at Labubu. Something was wrong. Its mouth, once stitched in a neutral expression, now seemed slightly upturned, almost smirking. My journal slipped from my hands, and I realized I was no longer just observing. I was being observed. Something had shifted, and I understood with chilling clarity that I had stepped into a story far larger and far darker than I had ever imagined. I started noticing the changes in my own behavior before I even realized the doll was orchestrating them. Dreams, blurred into reality, fragments of shadowy figures lurking at the edge of my vision, whispering my name in a language I didn't understand yet somehow recognized. I would wake drenched in sweat, convinced I had felt Labubu's tiny fingers brush my arm. And sometimes when I blinked, it was closer than it had been the night before, or tilted its head in a way that made my skin crawl. One evening I tried talking to it aloud. What do you want? I whispered, voice trembling, as if admitting my fear aloud could make it stronger. The room was silent until a faint creak came from the shelf. The doll's eyes seemed to glimmer in the dim light, reflecting something I couldn't name. I just want to be left alone, I admitted, my hands gripping the edge of the table. But I knew it didn't care. I knew now it fed on attention. But what exactly did it want from me? I confided in Sam, my roommate, hoping for rational intervention. It moves on its own, Sam. I'm not imagining this, I said, holding up the doll, shaking slightly. It's a toy, man. You're stressed. Maybe take a break, he replied, dismissing me with a laugh that barely masked concern. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation that betrayed his instinct that something was off, but he refused to acknowledge it. Days passed and my normal routines crumbled. Coffee in the morning tasted metallic. Lights flickered when I glanced away. The faint whispering followed me into the bathroom, the kitchen, even my bedroom. I would leave for work, but the doll would somehow be in my line of sight in my peripheral vision, its head tilted as though mocking me. Hallucinations became more persistent, shadows crawling up the walls, figures I would swear I heard whispering behind doors. Every interaction, every quiet moment became a test of my sanity. Then came the night of the full confrontation. I awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Heart hammering, I bolted upright and my eyes fell on the doll. Labubu was no longer on the shelf. It stood in the middle of my room, one arm raised, eyes glinting with intent. I froze. Panic surged, a cold, paralyzing dread that wrapped around my chest. I could hear a faint giggle, impossibly soft, yet echoing in my mind. The doll was no longer a passive observer. It had crossed a line, and I realized with horrifying clarity that whatever this thing was, it had chosen me. It wasn't just haunting me anymore. It was attacking. I backed away, tripping over my own feet, voice shaking as I whispered, "What do you want from me?" But the silence answered nothing. Only the faint creak of the floorboards and the metallic glint of those unblinking eyes promised that the worst was yet to come. After that night, nothing felt safe. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet and routine, became a cage of creeping dread. Every corner seemed to pulse with a silent menace, and Labubu sat in its usual place, or at least I thought it was usual. Sometimes I would glance away for a moment, only to turn back and find it closer or turned slightly, as though it had been observing me while I slept. I began documenting everything, movements, whispers, glances, even the times when I was certain it had moved while I was in another room. Electronic devices started acting strangely. My phone would buzz with messages from unknown numbers, each one blank except for one that simply read, "Don't ignore me." The message had no timestamp, no sender, nothing that could be traced. My laptop would flicker during video calls, a camera catching shadows that weren't there. Even the Wi-Fi would sporadically cut out, then reconnect, almost as if the house itself was breathing around me. I tried to confide in friends online, hoping someone could explain what was happening. I posted screenshots, descriptions, even photos of the doll, but most comments were deleted within hours. One forum member had left a cryptic note before their account vanished entirely. If you've seen it move on its own, don't let it know you're watching. It feeds on acknowledgement. I started to realize the pattern. Every warning I found online mirrored what I was experiencing in real time. I wasn't alone, and the others hadn't survived, or hadn't chosen to reach out fully before disappearing. Pets reacted strangely too. My cat, usually indifferent, would hiss and arch its back whenever Laboob was nearby. Shadows flickered across the walls, often synchronized with the doll's subtle shifts. One evening, I swore, I saw the doll's eyes following me from the reflection in the living room mirror. Its stitched mouth curled into a faint, mocking smirk. The line between reality and hallucination blurred. I caught myself talking aloud to the doll, negotiating, pleading, and even threatening, and sometimes I wasn't sure if it was me imagining the responses or if some intelligence was actually answering back. The isolation became suffocating. Sam tried to help, but even he started leaving for long periods, claiming work or errands. I couldn't blame him. I would have run too. Nights were the worst. The house groaned under the weight of silence, punctuated only by faint taps, whispers, and the occasional sound of the floor creaking under Labubu's unseen movements. I stopped leaving my apartment, afraid of what might follow me outside, afraid that once it had my attention, it would track me anywhere. Pets reacted strangely too. My cat, usually indifferent, would hiss and arch its back whenever Laboob was nearby. Shadows flickered across the walls, often synchronized with the doll's subtle shifts. One evening, I swore, I saw the doll's eyes following me from the reflection in the living room mirror. Its stitched mouth curled into a faint, mocking smirk. The line between reality and hallucination blurred. I caught myself talking aloud to the doll, negotiating, pleading, and even threatening, and sometimes I wasn't sure if it was me imagining the responses or if some intelligence was actually answering back. The isolation became suffocating. Sam tried to help, but even he started leaving for long periods, claiming work or errands. I couldn't blame him. I would have run too. Nights were the worst. The house groaned under the weight of silence, punctuated only by faint taps, whispers, and the occasional sound of the floor creaking under Labubu's unseen movements. I stopped leaving my apartment, afraid of what might follow me outside, afraid that once it had my attention, it would track me anywhere. Then came the messages. Emails, texts, and even comments on posts I didn't recognize appeared overnight. They were all similar, each one brief, unnerving, and unsigned. You can't escape it. I thought it couldn't follow me, until I heard it behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the doll was still on the shelf. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, a suffocating pressure crawling across my chest. I didn't sleep that night or performing actions at specific times. I began seeing patterns in leaving everything, offerings, shadows or isolating on the walls, it under certain street conditions. Signs outside my window. Others were more even disturbing, in the reflections of my coffee cup. That interaction and the interaction was in all could strengthen it. Watching, waiting. I scoured every fragment of online forums, trying to connect the dots, desperate for rules or rituals that might offer some protection. There were posts deleted, cached, and fragmented that suggested rituals to contain it, or to at least distract it temporarily. Even now, I can't tell you everything. Some truths are too dangerous. But one thing is certain, Labubu's presence isn't limited to this room, this apartment, or even this city. It moves through attention, through curiosity, and it waits patiently for the next mistake. And I realized that my final confrontation was no longer optional, it was inevitable. Knew I had to act or be consumed entirely? Every instinct screamed to run, to abandon the apartment, but I also knew that running meant leading it somewhere else, giving it new territory to claim. So I stayed armed with salt, candles, and every ritual I had painstakingly pieced together from the fractured warnings online. I spoke to it, whispered threats and bargains, each word trembling with fear, each sentence a lifeline to sanity I wasn't sure I still possessed. The air grew heavier, almost viscous, as if the room itself resented my defiance. Shadows stretched and flickered, the temperature dropping until every breath turned to visible mist. Labubu shifted impossibly fast, appearing closer than it should have been, its stitched grin twisting in ways that mocked my desperate efforts. I felt its gaze inside my skull, drilling into my thoughts, reading my panic and feeding on it. My hands shook as I tried to complete the ritual, and for a fleeting moment I thought I had succeeded. The doll froze, motionless, its eyes dull, almost lifeless. And then it moved. A single, deliberate step toward me, a whisper in a voice I couldn't place. "You can't hide," my scream caught in my throat as the lights flickered violently. I bolted, stumbling through my own apartment, and when I glanced back, Lebu was gone. Or perhaps it had never left. The room felt impossibly still, yet charged with menace, as if it were waiting for me, or for you,